Good afternoon. Thank you, Nira, for your gracious introduction, and thanks to the Center for American Progress for always living up to your name, for being at the epicenter of the nation's constant movement forward, and always making progress one step at a time. You know, I look at All in the Nation as only the latest step, but one that takes a realistic look at who we are, what America will look like, and what we can do to maximize the economic opportunity that will come with the seismic demographic shift we are seeing. It reiterates the importance of making sure our public policies work for all Americans, and specifically for Latinos, Asians, African Americans, Native Americans, and other underrepresented groups. For these are the policies that will help America as a whole. All in Nation lays out the facts. It tells us, and I quote, that in parts of the country, our multicultural future is already here. That, quote, people of color already constitute the majority in 49 of the nation's 366 metropolitan regions. That by 2050, non-Hispanic whites will make up 47% of the population, with communities of color combining to form a solid 53% majority. And it leads us to the inevitable conclusion that diversity is not something to tolerate, but rather something we must embrace for the good of us all and for the good of our competitiveness in a global marketplace. And that doing right by communities of color is doing right for the country. The economic statistics and benefits related to diversity are pretty outstanding, I think. The research behind All in Nation shows that diversity actually drives innovation. It creates new markets. It provides a significantly expanded consumer base for existing businesses and startups. The Latino market alone in the United States represents a $1.2 trillion market. In fact, if it was its own country, it would be the 15th largest economy in the world. The 15th largest economy in the world. Between 2002 and 2007, the number of businesses owned by African Americans, Latinos, and Asians grew more than 3 times as fast as white-owned businesses, and revenues grew more than twice as fast. But diversity also makes for better performing corporations. I do, as the chair of the Hispanic Task Force for Senate Democrats, I do an annual diversity survey of the Fortune 500 companies. And what do we ultimately see from that reality? We know that teams of diverse individuals solve problems better. They're better at developing new ideas and better at coming up with innovative solutions. And there's a case to be made for diversity as a fundamental element of a good business model. A study commissioned by CalPERS found that companies with diverse boards exceeded Dow Jones and NASDAQ average returns over 5 years, and companies that did not have diverse boards were at a competitive disadvantage. Advocacy groups like Catalyst have found that Fortune 500 companies with higher percentages of women board directors significantly financially outperform companies with fewer women directors. Calvert issued a study that found those companies that demonstrate a robust commitment to diversity, in addition to competitive financial performance, are better positioned to generate long-term value for their shareholders. As All in the Nation points out, the private sector is recognizing the bottom line benefits of diversity and quotes the CEO of PepsiCo, Indra Nooyi, as saying, "The diversity of people in a corporation promotes innovation because it achieves greater diversity of ideas." There's a link between diversity and innovation that's not theoretical, it's real. At the same time that diversity spurs innovation and will create good 21st century jobs, we have to realize that our changing population will need the skills to meet the requirements of those jobs. And that as our population changes, our educational system must keep up with those changes. In 2010, 54% of K-12 students were white. That's down from 67% in 1990. By 2025, just by way of one example, 1/4 of all, 25% of all of the nation's school children will be Latino. And the competitive future of the nation will depend on how well we educate them. In that same time frame, the number of Hispanic students has more than doubled. As All in Nation says, there are more students of color in our classrooms, and yet graduation and attainment rates are lingering behind. If that continues, there'll be a serious skill gap, considering that the fastest growing ethnic group, Latinos, currently has attainment rates decades behind what they'll need to do to meet 21st century job requirements. By 2020, 66% of jobs will require at least some post-secondary education. So the gap becomes clear when we realize that African Americans and Hispanics make up 27% of the workforce today, and by 2050, they will rise to 42% of the workforce. And in 2010, only 15% of Latinos, however, had a bachelor's degree compared to 27% of African Americans and 37% of non-Hispanic white Americans. So if you look at the demographics of where we're going, you look at where the nation will be in a relatively short time frame, you look at the global competitiveness of the nation's position, and you look at these realities in terms of attainment rates, you understand that All in Nation's plan to retool and rebuild to meet these challenges and give us a framework for the development of partnerships based on equality, human capacity, and on giving every American a chance at a decent job and good education, unlocking the potential of every child, rebuilding our infrastructure, improving health care, building a 21st century workforce, building income and assets, fixing our criminal justice system, and strengthening civic participation are critical elements of what that future will look like if we want to continue to be the global economic leader. The experts have spoken in All in Nation, and now we have a chance to get to work, realize the economic benefits and opportunities that come with diversity, and I believe we can start by making sure that we finish the job on passing comprehensive immigration reform. As the Center for American Progress has brought together the experts in taking a step towards eliminating racial and ethnic disparities in the country, the Senate has worked across the aisle and taken a step forward in a spirit of bipartisanship to make all in the nation a reality when it comes to make sure that there are no second-class citizens, no one living in the shadows, no one who doesn't have a chance to contribute to growing the economy. As a member of the Gang of Eight, I can tell you that the process that we went through was long and sometimes difficult, and it isn't necessarily the bill that I would have written had I had the ability to write the bill and get it passed by both houses of the Congress and signed by the President, but it was a bipartisan compromise that will finally fix our broken immigration system and bring 11 million immigrants out of the shadows. And not just the millions who are here for years without status, but millions more who have been waiting in line to be reunified with their families lawfully. For me, casting that vote was a proud moment. It was a vote for my mother, who worked hard to give me a chance to succeed in America, who came as an immigrant, and so many immigrants like her who came to this country in this last century to give their families a chance to contribute to America's exceptionalism. And this opportunity of reform is to give others now a chance to contribute to America's exceptionalism in this century. It was a vote for many young, skilled, educated dreamers and entrepreneurs who now have a chance to become citizens and help us grow the nation. And that is the crux of the economic argument that I think we progressives need to make to our Republican friends. That, as All in Nation argues, in order to increase economic security, our national economic policies must focus on creating good family supporting jobs, building a strong workforce, and a growing base of entrepreneurs, and strengthening the nation's capacity to innovate and produce. The fact is, fixing the broken immigration system would do all of that. As CAP's own research shows, it would increase America's GDP by over $800 billion over 10 years. It would increase wages of all Americans by $470 billion over 10 years, and it would increase jobs by 121,000 per year for 10 years. That's 1.2 million new jobs. Immigrants start businesses, they create jobs for all American workers, and it's time to harness that economic power. The Congressional Budget Office, nonpartisan entity of the Congress, reported that immigration reform could reduce the deficit by $197 billion over the first decade, by another $700 billion over the following decade through changes in direct spending and revenues. We're talking about almost $1 trillion in deficit reduction that can lift from the backs of the next generation a great part of that burden. What other single piece of legislation that the Congress has offered increases the gross domestic product of the United States, increases wages, creates jobs, and lowers the deficit at the same time? I would venture to say there are few, if any. What we realize now, what's been confirmed by the numbers, is that giving 11 million people a clear and defined pathway to citizenship is in effect an economic growth strategy and exactly the right thing to do. And that is the argument, the economic argument that we must make to those in the House and those who need to be convinced of benefits of an all-in nation. That is the argument that we need to make to Speaker Boehner to take the next step, and I'm afraid he may need us to help him create the support to be able to move in that direction. As I've said many times before, and I'll say it again, this is my 21st year in the Congress between the House and the Senate, and I will say that August is a time in which legislative ideas die, or they survive and live and have the opportunity to finally become a reality. So now is the time. Those of us who deeply believe in the need for immigration reform cannot let up. We cannot be complacent. We can't go on vacation during August. In August, we need to gather every group and every interested party, women, chamber leaders, business leaders, community-based and faith-based organizations, our friends in labor and who have been at the backbone of this, and so many others who can influence Republican members of the House in their own districts. The economic message of all in nation is a message we need to send in August. It's a message our friends in the business community can help us send to leaders in Washington. It's a basic economic message I know will resonate with every member of the House and will make every Republican take notice, even in the safest districts. Because, as All in Nation says, even in the safest districts, eliminating ethnic disparities based on 2011 numbers would increase average incomes by over 8%. Increase GDP by $1.2 trillion and lift 13 million people out of poverty. We need to make the all-in-nation case that we have to invest in communities of color. We have to close the racial divide. We have to take action and keep pressure on all of our policymakers to bring this nation together. Because at the end of the day, it is the right thing to do, but it also makes good economic sense, and it will secure our future. And even if someone disagrees with my views or with our views as progressives about what the right reasons are from the debates I've heard in Washington, I don't think anybody would disagree with the idea of deficit reduction. I don't think they would disagree with the economic benefits that have been well established by the Congressional Budget Office, or with the benefit to entrepreneurial American businesses and high-tech startups, or the fundamental economic benefit that would come to everyone in this country if we create and build on the concepts of an all-in nation. So let me close simply by saying, as a former member of the House, I know that the last thing House members want to hear is any advice from the Senate. But I do believe that a bipartisan effort that we undertook could serve as a model for a similar process in the House. August is a time of action. I've always said, if you feel the heat at home, you see the light in Washington. We need to apply some good fundamental heat and tell our Republican friends, for those of us here today, that this debate is about fairness and equity. But for those who think more in terms of economic benefit, we simply need to make the case that it is as much about the nation's economic security and competitiveness as it is doing what we know in our hearts is right. This year is the 50th anniversary on August 28th of Dr. King's March on Washington. His vision of a more equitable nation is really the fundamental message of the All-in-Nation report. We can become a more equal society with a vision of a more equitable nation and drive real economic benefits in the process. I hope that we will do all we can in order to begin us down that road, because we know that this is the essence of what is right for the nation. We have seen the future, and it is ours to grasp and realize. Thank you very much for having me with you today.